Today I'm going to be talking about KNDI America. It's an electric car manufacturer that's really put their name out there as having the most affordable EVs in the entire US. Their base car is going to start at 10 grand after incentives, which is always a big asterisk. Incentives don't last forever. This is way lower than many other auto manufacturers we've seen in the EV space, especially because many of these new EV companies are targeting the premium market first. Their cheapest vehicle is going to be the Model K27, which is going to be 10 grand after federal tax. However, the MSRP is $17,500. State incentives can lower things, but you also need to keep in mind that these federal tax incentives are limited. They only get so much. So if you notice the asterisk down here, we could see it only applies to the first 1,000 customers. And the same applies to the K23, their larger vehicle. It is $27,500, but if you get federal tax credits, it goes down to 20 grand. And of course, state incentives vary by state to state. Some have a lot, others have none whatsoever. And again, this only applies to the first 1,000 customers. You might remember not too long ago that Tesla's federal tax credit went away. Tesla was applying these chunks to their vehicles, and as people bought them, they were able to redeem the incentives, and they completely ran out of all of that because Teslas have been selling like hotcakes. Going back to KNDI, however, let's take a look at their 23 first. It's an interesting design. I think the outside is a little ugly personally, but other people might like it. They have a lot of photos and a lot of details on the specifications for this vehicle. Also, I want to clarify, I said KNDI America, and that's what the company is called. However, they are a Chinese-based company. And as far as I understand, these cars are all made in China. If we take a look at the actual performance specifications, they are using an AC motor, which is fairly common, especially for more performance-oriented EVs. However, they are going to have to use an inverter because batteries only hold DC. The rated power of the motor is 49 kilowatts, which is just barely over 65 horsepower. That is a very, very slow car. It's front-wheel drive only, which kind of sucks in my opinion. One of the big advantages of an EV is that you don't really need a transmission, so you can squeeze your motors in the rear without complicating things too much, and you can get a much more sporty, fun-feeling car. In this case, it's front-wheel drive like a standard Econo box, which is, in my opinion, disappointing for an EV. The curb weight is just under 3,000 pounds. It has anti-lock brakes and seating for 4 adults, and it is a pretty tiny car. And their battery is pretty tiny too, only 41.4 kilowatt hours for this lithium phosphate battery. The things that really strike me on this page is the fact that it's 111 miles, which is very, very short for an EV. I understand with a small compact car like this, it's really more designed to be a city-style car, but that is a tiny, tiny range. And honestly, that can be kind of oppressive to live with. Once you start to get to 200 miles plus, you can make some pretty comfy road trips without needing to stop at all. But this is a tiny range. This feels like an EV from the past. Another thing that really struck out to me is just how bad the MPGE is. For those of you who don't know, MPGE is miles per gallon equivalent. So it's basically measures the efficiency of the car, the miles per gallon if it was a gasoline vehicle. Now, EVs tend to have really high ratings for their MPGE because electric motors are far more efficient than gasoline motors. But that is an awful rating. It is seriously really bad, especially for something with such a tiny motor. It's only putting out 65 horsepower. To put things in perspective, the US Department of Energy has an entire chart with the most efficient EVs in the US based off their rating. We can see Hyundai is actually fairly impressive with many of the sedans they offer. However, most of this list is really dominated by Teslas. And we can see the top spot is a Tesla Model 3 Standard Range Plus, which sits at 141 mpge. If we go to the next page, it's still Teslas. This micro BMW i3, which is a very tiny car that makes extensive use of carbon fiber. And if we keep going, Teslas, this super tiny Scion IQ, And one thing to realize about these other non-Tesla manufacturers is that they tend to have very, very tiny batteries. So they're not pulling that much weight, yet they are way less efficient. We get some Hyundais, the Chevys. We keep going, there's more Chevys. This is where most of the Chevys and Volkswagens sit in this 119 rating, including the Honda Fit. And we keep going and going and going, but we haven't hit the 90s yet. We scroll down, we're on the 5th page so far. And this is including microcars like the Fiat 500e. And here we are in the 90s. I had to scroll all the way to page 19, which is why you don't see me going through all the other pages. And the vehicles down here are things like very old Teslas, or Tesla Model X Performance, which is a giant, fat SUV with super high performance motors and massive 20-inch wheels, which really murder efficiency. And again, a lot of these are very, very old Teslas, sort of in the 90s here. So that's one thing that really jumped out to me, the fact that this vehicle really has poor efficiency. And you might be saying, hey, electricity is crazy cheap. It doesn't really matter if it has bad fuel economy. And that's kind of true when you talk about fuel costs, but the big reason that efficiency is important for EVs is, one, it allows you to have more range. Imagine if this was in the 110s, you would have way more range with the exact same size battery. It would be a fairly notable difference. Additionally, it also affects how fast you charge in terms of miles per hour. You can only charge at so much rate. You can keep your charging speed the same and be gaining more miles per hour spent charging because your vehicle is more efficient. So efficiency for EVs is actually important. The more efficient you can get, the more mileage you're getting out of that vehicle, the faster you're charging effectively when it comes to distance per time unit charged. And another thing is that teeny tiny 65 horsepower motor. This thing has a top speed of 72 miles an hour, and that's going to be full throttle. There are multiple highways in the United States that are 85 miles an hour, so that is pretty rough. A lot of people honestly tend to drive over the speed limit by 5 or 10 too in the left lane. If you have to commute on those highways in like Texas and stuff, you might have a commute that's within the mile range and everything, but if you're going this slow, you're also going to kill your mileage if you go that fast. This is not a performance mix, and it is a little concerning. Going back to the 27, this is a much smaller car, a much cheaper car, but still a pretty high price if you're not within the first 1,000 customers. You take a closer look at this vehicle. It's an interesting design. I wouldn't call it pretty, but some people might think it's cute. Again, they seem to be using a similar performance motor, 45 kilowatts. Although 45 kilowatts is only around 60 horsepower. But it also is a smaller vehicle, but you're also missing out on your top speed. 68 miles per hour top speed. Efficiency is better, which is expected of a smaller vehicle. And you have a small range of 59 miles. Honestly, that kind of gets into the territory of almost unusable for a lot of people. Now, this is a fairly old document, but it does detail a bunch of data on the average commute for typical Americans. We can see a lot of people are pretty low down there in the mileage, but once you get to 15 miles or more, you have to go one way, then back, and if you get caught in traffic, or if you're driving on the highway, which, again, oftentimes go up to 85 miles an hour unless you want to drive really slow, then you are really cutting it close. If it is cold outside, you're going to be losing battery range. If it's hot outside, you're going to be running the AC and also losing battery range. So when you get to around 30 miles driven a day, maybe you get to 40 miles driven a day just commuting, and when you're using all these other tools like AC, or you're trying to get to work faster, that 59-mile range does get a little tight. And you have to charge every single day. You can't afford to miss, or if you forget to plug it in, you run into issues where you can't even get to work without charging. They do offer a long warranty, which is nice, but again, there's a lot about this car that is low performance. And I get what you're probably saying is, hey, this vehicle is super affordable. And I do understand it's affordable, but you have to realize that to a certain extent, vehicles are a status symbol. Oftentimes, people buy vehicles for status. I mean, they use them for commuting, they use them every single day, but they don't want to commute in a crappier vehicle. And I think really a good show of this is the Tata Nano. The Tata Nano was the world's cheapest car, and you would think, launching in a huge market like India, that tons of people would buy it. Well, no, because it's a super cheap, kind of ugly, tiny little thing, and it's a low status symbol. Many people preferred nicer older cars, used vehicles, or motorcycles, which are hugely popular in India. And when we look at the vehicles that Americans are buying, we look at SUVs and trucks. Everyone is buying SUVs and trucks in the US. It is a huge, huge market. Not too long ago, in May of 2020, more pickup trucks were sold than cars in the United States. And this has been reported on and seen for a long time now. SUVs, trucks, selling like crazy. Cars, especially small, ultra-compact cars, the subcompact section, most auto manufacturers have pulled out of that section in the US. They're not even bothering fighting over the little crumbs in that tiny, tiny arena. And when we take a look at the most popular vehicles in America, we see truck, SUV, truck. It gets ridiculous, really. You know, when we look at cars that are actually being sold, there's the Honda Civic, which is popular, the Toyota Camry, which is a larger car, Honda Accord, larger car, Toyota Corolla. These two fall into the compact car segment. These two not compact at all. As you can see, there are no subcompact cars that are in the top 10 sellers. The only cars really selling are these popular Honda Civics, Corollas, Accords, Camrys. And when you start dealing with those price points, it gets a little crazy. You have to realize you can buy a brand new 2021 Civic for $21,000. And remember, when we were taking a look at the vehicle prices of the Kandi, with federal offers, that's really what they're relying on to cut the price down big time. If we go back here, that's $27,500. That's way more than a Civic. And if we go to the K27, that's $17,500. If we take a look at a brand new 2021 Corolla, that's $19,925, and oftentimes there are tons of manufacturer incentives. In fact, right now we see this 0% APR offer going through Toyota right now. And these are beloved vehicles. These are among the only cars really selling in large numbers in the United States. And you're within spitting distance, sometimes lower when you consider manufacturing incentives. Used cars are not what they were like 5-10 years ago, but there's still a robust, huge amount of used cars available that are way cheaper than this brand new EV that is forcefully a city car that isn't really suitable for many Americans who want to take an occasional trip. They need to go out and rent a car, but why would you spend so much money, more than a nice used car, for something that you can't actually drive a crazy amount other than commuting? Another thing to keep in mind is that you actually have to pre-order the vehicle right now. There's a reservation cost of $100, and you also need to consider tax and shipping when you're actually ordering this thing, since Kandi does not have a robust dealer network in the United States, which is also going to make it pretty difficult to sell these cars with ease. Now, Tesla doesn't utilize dealerships, but they are a much bigger company, and they have tons of facilities all throughout the US. Now that we've spent a lot of time talking about the actual product they're selling and the concerns I have with the product, I don't have concerns that it's going to be a piece of crap that doesn't work. I don't think Kandi is a scam company or anything. And until we get these vehicles out on the road and driving, it's really hard to say how good they are at being a car, but the type of stats they have and the type of vehicle they are targeting an extremely, extremely niche market in the United States. Legitimately, a super niche market. And that is really concerning. These small little city cars, which kind of become more and more irrelevant as you consider how popular ride sharing is, how popular e-bikes and other stuff are, they've just exploded over the past few years. And you consider companies like Tesla, which are trying to get into the robo-taxi business, and you really need to wonder about the future of a company like this. Who is going to be buying these tiny little city cars if there are robo-taxis everywhere? Now we have a bunch of financial data from Kandi about their various financials and other information. Kandi America is actually just a small subsidiary of the huge Kandi Technologies Group. We can look at the financials of the company, and they've actually suffered a net loss, even though this is for Kandi Technologies, not just Kandi America, which is kind of unfortunate. I understand a lot is going on, but they are losing money. This is an interesting stock. I mean, they are launching a product. They have a factory in China. They're producing these things. There is a decent amount going on with this company. I will say it is cool that they are producing and selling cars, although, as I understand it, they're all produced in China and then sent over to the US, which does increase costs a good amount, especially because there are currently a decent amount of trade tensions between the US and China. And whenever you're dealing with Chinese stocks, you have to consider the trade tensions and the fact that there's sometimes talks about delisting Chinese companies, other talks about keeping them. There's back and forth, and you do need to consider things like that. It is pretty nice that their gross margins are increasing, and they do have a fairly good margin on their product. They seem to be selling a lot of off-road vehicles, but those aren't available in the US right now, as far as I can tell. You do need to consider the fact this company is a subsidiary. They are dipping their toes in the US market with these cheap EVs, and taking a look at the product, I do wonder how well it will sell, if they'll find any success in the US. When it comes to a lot of Chinese manufacturers, they've had difficulty capitalizing on Western vehicle markets. When you look at Europe, there hasn't been a single Chinese manufacturer that has found success in Europe. Although when you look at companies like NIO and XPEV, it's kind of cool to see how much they're accomplishing, how they're making a pretty compelling product and trying to win over the Chinese market and then moving over to these Western nations. I'd say this does kind of seem like an experiment from Kandi. Kandi does have a decent amount of funding from large entities. It's fascinating to see how they're approaching the market. It's something dramatically different from all these luxury EVs we see, but you see luxury EVs because it's a lot easier to start with a large margin luxury vehicle than it is to start with a mass production, small, compact, cheap vehicle. It's different, but I am a little concerned about their strategy of targeting the US and what happens once they're out of incentives. Because once they're out of federal incentives, it is not going to be a competitive vehicle. I'm convinced that EVs are the future for personal transportation vehicles. However, you need to realize that it's not difficult to live with a gasoline car in the US. It is actually very easy. Most of our cars are gasoline or diesel based. They are everywhere throughout the entire United States. So it doesn't make a crazy amount of sense to go for an EV. There's obviously the idea of saving the environment and being more environmentally conscious, which is fantastic, and I'm sure there are people willing to pay a premium for that, but are they willing to really screw themselves over that hard to buy a Kandi without any incentive versus a Toyota Corolla or Honda Civic, which are really staples of the American car market? If you want to jump into the stock market and start investing, I have a referral link in the description for Webull. If you sign up, you'll get 2 free stocks and have access to a fantastic mobile and web app.